Welcome back to the Frustrated CEO podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, here with my esteemed colleagues and co-hosts, Patsy Feeman and Leb Tannenbaum. Welcome to both of you.
Hey, Patrick.
Thank you.
Today, we're excited to welcome Ben Pring as our guest. I think it's going to be, we're going to cover a lot of topics that I'm anticipating will be beneficial to you, our Frustrated CEO listener. Ben Pring is the head of thought leadership at Cognizant. He's co-founder and leader of Cognizant's Center for the Future of Work and a member of Cognizant's executive leadership team. He's also co-author of the best-selling and award-winning books, What to Do When Machines Do Everything, and Code Halos, How the Digital Lives of People, Things, and Organizations Are Changing the Rules of Business. And Ben's latest book, Monster, Taming the Machines That Rule Our Lives, Jobs, and Future, was published in March 2021 and was a Financial Times Book of the Month. Ben sat on the advisory board of the Labor and Work-Life program at Harvard Law School between 2017 and 2020. He was named one of the 30 management thinkers to watch in 2020 by Thinkers 50 and was recently named a leading influencer on the future of work by Analytica. Ben, welcome to the Frustrated CEO.
Thank you, Patrick. It's great to be with you all.
Now, we're going to try to cover a number of different important topics today with Ben, like technology and AI, leading through change, things that Ben and his team at Cognizant are hearing from CEOs out there, and then other trends that he's seeing that may impact you, your business, and the future of work. But what first drew my attention to Ben and led me to reach out to invite him to the show is a recent article he wrote on leading in the green business boon featured on Forbes.com. Ben, what is the green business boon and why is it important for CEOs and leaders to be paying attention?
Well, the whole notion of sustainability focused on the environment has obviously been a growing topic, a growing issue for many, many years now. Our observation probably 2 years ago was that it really broke through into the CEO, the board level, C-suite level conversation at Davos in 2019, at the World Economic Forum in Davos 2019, because that conversation had been sort of on the edge of an event like Davos for many years. People on the fringe of the conference, activists, environmentalists have been talking about this for a long time. But a light bulb went off, I think, in the business community, in the business crowd then, that this was not only something they had to do, for all sorts of logical and appropriate, real good reasons, but it was going to be a money-making opportunity. And we sort of came up with this notion that business people had looked at green as red, as a cost on the balance sheet, but it was flipping over into being green. Green was becoming green, a money-making opportunity. And so we came up with this phrase that there was going to be a green rush. You remember the sort of the code rush of a few years ago, and of course, the original gold rush from the 1860s. That there was going to be an opportunity to make serious money in this transition into the next wave of renewables, getting out of fossil fuels into electrics in the automobile industry, etc. And you can be cynical about that, and you can be skeptical about that, and you can scratch your head and think this is a bit shameful that businesses are only taking this seriously and getting beyond the greenwashing that they've been criticized for many years when there's a money-making opportunity. But the truth is that we all operate in a capitalist environment, capitalist system, and making money is a huge motivation, clearly. And so I think you've begun to see that change in the zeitgeist. That's what our report is really about, looking at the commercial opportunities to deploy technology predominantly into this challenge and thus, create an opportunity. And we try to sketch out the scale of that opportunity, the types of technologies that are going to be involved, IoT, sensors, artificial intelligence, all the technologies that we work with many of our clients on. But putting that into that business opportunity, that money-making opportunity, that's really what the report is. And I think, certainly in the last couple of years, and certainly in an accelerating way, I think you can see more and more evidence that the tide has really turned. And there's Greta, but now there's Gordon Gekko, and these two are kind of bumping into each other for the first time. And we kind of think they're going to get along fine.
Do you have to be do you have to be an entrepreneur going into the green space, or a company already in the green space, or can you take an existing company in the insurance field or in the in the automotive business? So I didn't create myself to be a green company. Can you do that and still benefit from the green rush?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunity, because this is going to be such a big transition in businesses, in societies, and it's going to take a long time, frankly. I mean, just think about automobiles, that transition into electrics, and then potentially self-driving. I mean, that's going to take probably longer than people, certainly some of the first wave evangelists, have suggested. I mean, Mercedes today were talking about a transition into making 50% of their cars electric, probably over a 10, 15-year window. So that's a sizable amount of time beyond sort of the Q by Q financial expectations that businesses have to be focused on. But so there's opportunity at a scale organization like Mercedes. There's certainly a lot of opportunity on the sort of smaller entrepreneurial end of the scale. But I think there is opportunity up and down that scale, because this is going to be such a huge transition, and it's going to take a long time. If I was, a young guy today, and I was thinking about what field to go into, what industry to go into, I mean, this would be one of the key ones that I would pursue. The electrification of automobiles, the greenification of all sorts of aspects of our world. I think this is going to be a huge opportunity. I think there are opportunities across industries. It's not just automobiles, it's not just manufacturing, it's all sorts of white collar, bourgeois, office-based industries that are going to need to change pretty substantially in the next few years. And COVID, again, is another kind of catalyst for that change. So, no, I think the scale of this opportunity and the role that technology is going to play in every industry you can imagine, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity for everyone here.
Ben, I don't know if this fits in, so I'm going to get it a little closer to home. So my son has an outdoor advertising company here in Portland, Oregon, small company, and they just did the hard work to become B certified. So they're now a B Corp, and they really wanted to be a part of that kind of global community and follow those practices. I'm just wondering, like, as you look at this on a broader scale, are you surprised that more companies are not going through the B certification process, and just any thoughts about that?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a great thought. It's certainly at a personal level something I'm very, very sympathetic to. I think this sort of late stage Western capitalist world that we live in, the sort of dysfunction within that is becoming more and more obvious to more and more people in terms of income inequality, in terms of the sort of the compounding of winners and losers. And technology is playing a huge part in that. And in fact, that's what our latest book, Monster, is really about. So I'm very sympathetic to that desire to, in a way, reframe capitalism, and the B Corp model and movement is a big part of that. I think more and more people are, not just young people, not just people in sort of progressive Northwest, are thinking about this. You may have seen the Pope this week making moves and announcements about a new alliance with some very sort of high profile people around the world, business people around the world, trying to reframe capitalism, trying to recast capitalism, if you like. So I think this notion that we can see the problems and the dysfunctions with this very kind of Gordon Gekko world I mentioned earlier on. And I think there's more and more people aligning themselves with that. I think also, and this is another report that we produced earlier in the year, working with the Sloan Management Review at MIT, on this notion of purpose that has become quite fashionable in sort of management circles in the last couple of years. Again, something you can be cynical about, but the point that we make in that report, and perhaps your son would sort of align himself with this, is that there's a very strong Venn diagram overlap between these new attitudes, these new progressive attitudes of people who want to reframe capitalism, who want purpose beyond just the paycheck, and the technology talent that many large organizations are struggling and desperate to get at the moment. There's these Venn diagrams, there's a pretty 100% match between the attitudes of the next wave of digital talent and these new ideas. So big companies, insurance companies, all sorts of companies, conservative companies, cautious companies, cynical, skeptical companies are having to take this new agenda more seriously, because they have to attract and retain that talent if they want any future in this increasingly sort of digitized fourth industrial revolution world that we live in. So again, I think that's a catalyst for taking ideas which have been on the edge of mainstream business for many years and actually dragging them into the heart of the agenda of those big conservative, traditional companies.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Are there any other, besides the B Corp movement, any other movements like that you want to mention, or anything that you're seeing maybe from a different angle?
Well, I think there's a variety of different versions of that. I mean, and clearly that's sort of kind of an American-centric perspective. Certainly in the European marketplace, there are models, financial models akin to that, similar to that, which are in fact more established, more mainstream than they are in the US. There's certainly also in other parts of the world. New Zealand is one example. Differing business models, differing financial structure models, which come from a similar sentiment, a similar perspective, if you like. So I think it's an interesting time in which even the sort of house organ of Western capitalism, the Financial Times, spends more and more time talking about this issue, talking about the need to reframe the last 40 years, the post-Reagan era of Gordon Gekko style capitalism. I wrote a piece a while ago with the title "AI the Straw, Inequality the Camel," with the notion that this AI and the potential it has to just increase the returns for the FANG vendors, for the digital vendors, but really automate everybody out of the equation. Maybe this will be the straw that breaks that camel's back of this increasing inequality that we can see all around us, which has been happening for a long period of time, but which technology has the potential to sort of take to the next level. So no, these are very kind of real issues, which again I think have been on the edge of the radar and becoming more in the middle of the radar for CEOs and people who have to take these sort of things seriously.
Yes.
So I'm curious, as leaders do have to start taking this seriously, especially those that are maybe resisting this, taking it too seriously, what are leaders having to let go of? What are they? What are they having to let go of to really embrace this kind of recasting capitalism?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Patsy. I mean, just to point to one individual, people will be very familiar with Mark Benioff at Salesforce. I think the way he has talked about this and the way he has really set a pretty clear direction for his company in this transition from that Gordon Gekko shareholder model into what again broadly being called stakeholder capitalism now. I think the moves that he has made have been very progressive. Again, obviously he's very aligned with the World Economic Forum people, with Klaus Schwab. He's very much, in that conversation and setting the tone of that conversation and what the agenda of that conversation is. I think in terms of what you let go, I think this is one of the conundrums in a way, is that this seems to be an additional challenge for the CEO rather than an and/or. It's not as though you can let go of those Q by Q expectations. It's not as though you can let go of those briefings to analysts. In a way, you have to do that. That becomes necessary, but not sufficient in a way to be a successful CEO now. I think perhaps, and again, there are pretty prominent people. I'm trying to Barry Diller as one example, who've said that the whole Q by Q analyst briefing model, should be let go. We should walk away from that. And I think he got some blowback trying to sort of propose that idea. But again, I think that shows you that there is a change in the weather. That if somebody as prominent as that is prepared to talk on CNBC about that, I think you take those sorts of lead indicators quite seriously. It's not going to change overnight. This type of level, this level of change is obviously so macro that change is going to be glacial. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that question. It's a great question. What can you not do? I'm not sure there's much you can't do. It's what you have to do in addition. Net, the CEO's job is not getting any easier anytime.
Yep.
Yeah. So then that leads to a question. If I'm listening to you say that, and I'm thinking my job's already hard, and now I've got these other things that are additive.
Yeah.
How, based on what your cognizance research or conversations you've had with CEOs or what you're seeing, how does a CEO filter out what's important and urgent from the sea of noise that's what everybody's saying they have to be focused on? How do they boil it down to the most important things?
Yeah, I think that's becoming one of the key differentiators for any senior person, and particularly that type of senior person as CEO. Is to have that filtering mechanism around them, that signal to noise diffusion around them. What should they be paying attention to? Because they are surrounded by noise and more noise. And there are people like me shouting louder and louder saying, look here, do this, do that. I mean, again, it's kind of crazy. I think in a way, the CEO role, and this is an observation rather than based on any particular empirical research, we've tended to have this perception of this king style or queen style CEO, this sort of superhuman person, and it's all them. It's all about them. It's all about what they can process, their bandwidth, their capability. I think what you're beginning to see is more of a kind of prima inter pares, first among equals kind of model, where some of that responsibility is diffusing away from one single person into a team of equals, a team of first among equals. I've seen evidence of that in some of the clients we work with. I've certainly read significantly about that, and I think there's good reason to do that, because there is so much for a CEO to handle. You may have been reading about Jane Walmsley at GSK recently, under attack from activist investors. And one of the points that in the critique of her, and not to personalize it in any way, was that she didn't have strong enough advice, particularly on the scientific side. She didn't really have a strong enough scientific board of advisors, both internally and externally, to guide her as a non-science person. She comes from a marketing background, to really be able to make decisions about big bets that you need to make in the pharmaceutical industry, 10-year, 20-year bets, that perhaps she needed more advice around her, again, to be able to kind of pass that signal from noise. One of the points that I've been making for a long period of time If you buy this logic that software is eating the world, and every company is sort of becoming a tech company, that there are lots of businesses that are still obviously, in insurance and healthcare, being run by people who don't really understand technology that well. And they need to up their familiarity, their understanding of tech. Because if every company is a tech company, you're basically leading a tech company. You need to understand tech probably much more deeply than you do today. And so I think that notion of really surrounding yourself with advisors, with filters, with people who can give you unvarnished truth, uncomfortable truth, to help you see around those corners, I think that's becoming more and more important. And this notion that the CEO can be removed, can be imperial, can just issue edicts and everybody jumps. I'm not sure that model is going to really scale, particularly at this moment where things are changing, as quickly as they are.
That's a great answer. It makes me think of some of when we're working through all this change, this VUCA world, however you describe everything that's happened over, especially the last 20 months. So I'm not going yet more into your space of the future, but we talk to a lot of CEOs and leaders who are trying to discern what's in their control and what's not in their control. And I'm just curious if you're seeing any trends about how people respond to things that they feel are not in their control. And some of the generational older leaders, as an example, they're frustrated by technology.
Yes.
They know it's important. I don't even know if they surrounded themselves with scientific advisors, if they would know much how to make a decision about any of that. But I'm curious what you're seeing, because you see it from a much broader and deeper perspective.
Yeah. Well, again, to sort of extend that notion, imagine the CEO of a car company hated cars. I mean, you can't. You couldn't imagine that. But there are plenty of people in quasi or even real tech companies who hate Twitter, who probably have never been on TikTok, who don't understand the technology, don't understand how it works, don't understand the experience it's offering. I mean, just one example came to my mind recently, a company called Shein. Have you heard of Shein? Shein is a Chinese company that is one of the biggest retailers in China. And the way they retail is all through TikTok. And they're just beginning online. And they're just beginning to create pop-up stores here in the States. I was down in Miami a couple of weeks ago, and amidst all of these stores that were closed down, pandemic victims and these sort of dead-looking main streets, there was this one store. I was walking down with my kids, and there were like 300 kids standing outside the store. And I said, "What's happening? What are these guys doing?" And my kids knew about this, but I'd never heard of it. And then you read about Shein and how they're selling and how their supply chain is organized and how it's all created and offered through the experience on TikTok. That's the future of retail. If you don't understand what's going on, if you're not following that, if you fundamentally hate that and think, "Oh my God, this is the end of Western civilization," how can you lead a company if you're not really tuned into that? And so one of the, I wrote a piece about a guy called, you may know the name if you're a music fan, a guy called Clive Davis, who's an A&R guy. And he was on American Idol. You may have seen him on American Idol back in the day. He's 85 years old and he's still the head of Warner Music. And it's not just the sort of titular title. It's not just eminence Greece kind of title. He's actually still working. He signed Janis Joplin back in the 60s, and he's still signing bands today. And I wrote a piece saying, well, how does he do that? How does he stay in the game? It comes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier on. He surrounds himself by with young people, advisors. And the crucial thing he does, and I think this is what is relevant in this conversation about technology and big business, is he can separate his heart and his mind. He can sort of pat his head and rub his tummy, or the other way around at the same time, because he realizes the bands, the artists he's signing are not for him. You know, he goes home of an evening and listens to Frank Sinatra, but at work he's listening to, you know, an 18-year-old.
That's great.
Today. And I think that's very difficult to do, to separate your ego from what the market really wants. And I see this with insurance companies as an example. There's a 45-year-old, a 50-year-old person now in a pretty responsible position developing an experience, an app, and they're developing it for themselves rather than realizing that they should be developing it for a 30-year-old who's beginning to come into the insurance market, whose taste, experience, whose learning, whose use and familiarity and comfort with technology, the platforms, is totally different from what that 50-year-old has, you know, wants and experience. Again, that separation of your ego from what the market wants, I think that's very difficult to do. But I think it's going to become increasingly important for leaders to be able to do that, because the technology is changing so fast, because, as with that Sheen example, the way the world is going is totally different from what you can control. Coming back to your question, if you want to control the world, good luck to you. But frankly, you're going to have a tougher and tougher time doing that.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
So Ben, that actually, as you were speaking about that, the companies whose employees don't necessarily embrace technology, even companies who don't view themselves yet as technology companies, who potentially need to begin. You made a comment that I heard in a different medium. You said the folks that can be adaptive along this journey, the journey of adapting to AI technology, or just being adaptive in general, will do well. And the simple reality is that those who can't are probably going to have less of a role in the organization going forward. And then you talked about the CEO's role in facilitating that, in allaying people's fear of change or fear of technology. Talk about that here. What is the CEO's role in in bringing the organization along, adapting to technology, embracing creating apps for a 30-year-old instead of myself, or embracing the technology in the supply chain?
Yeah. No, I think, again, this is, there's a lot of cliche in the discussion about change and the role of leaders within change. But it is a fundamentally mission critical issue for large organizations now. I mean, again, if you put this in a sort of macro economic context at the moment, as we sort of try to, stutteringly try to exit back into the real world after the virus, the K-shaped recovery that the economists talk about, the determinant, the differentiator between whether you're going that way or whether you're going that way on the K-shape is really your routes to market, and whether you have sophisticated world-class digital routes to market. That's fundamentally what's going on at the moment. And so for a large company that doesn't have those sort of sophisticated and hardened routes to market, that hasn't really acted on the sort of digital transformation memo that people like me have been talking about for 10, 20 years, this is a moment of existential threat, an existential challenge to them, which boils down to ultimately the company's ability now to really embrace change. I've talked about this, what I call the bell curve distribution of change, for quite a few years now. And what I mean by that is that people, and I think organizations, either change from a position of strength or a position of weakness. Roger Federer changed his racket after he'd won 14 majors because he figured to keep in the game as he got older, he needed a bigger racket. Many people wouldn't have changed that racket, but he was in a position of strength and he changed, and he's won, 6 more. So that's changing from a position of strength. Changing from a position of weakness is, when you check into the Betty Ford clinic, you basically rock bottom. You're on a burning platform. But if you think about that bell curve, the distribution, the Roger Federer's is 1 or 2%, maybe 5% of organizations, of people that change from a position of strength. They want to get better. Accenture is one of the best examples in the marketplace writ large of a company that continues to change from a position of strength. And then at the other end of the bell curve, those people who go to Betty Ford, or who, a fundamental business burning platform, and they have to change, that's probably only another 5%. Mm-hmm. So it's really 90% of businesses, 90% of people aren't doing great. They're not doing awful. They're kind of in the middle. They're in the muddled middle, as we call it. And change in the muddled middle is very, very difficult, because you're just trying to keep on the horse. You're just trying to keep alive. You're just trying to meet the next quarter. You're just trying to meet the sales target you've got, the quota you've got. It's very, very hard to change within that. I think bringing this back to the CEO, again, the CEO's role in that muddled middle, if you like, is to create a compelling enough narrative that you can explain why the change is fundamentally needed, why people may not even really see that, may not even really feel that, may not really be that motivated to do that. I think driving that compelling message, the logic of that, the emotion of that, the need for this, and what that journey is going to look like, and what the promised land is going to be like when we've gone through that journey. That is, I think, again, the ability to tell that story, to bring people along that journey, to create followers on that journey. It's always been critical. It's always been the challenge of a CEO. But I think, again, in this moment where the underlying compelling economics of doing this, driven by technology, supercharged by the pandemic, I mean, if this is not the time, when is, frankly? I think that's going to be the fundamental challenge for a CEO. And of course, it's easy to say, it's very hard to do, completely, non-obvious, non-simple. But that is the challenge, and that's why you're paid the big bucks, frankly.
Right.
I have I think it might be a two-step question. When you said the word burning platform, it creates a lot of pictures, and when I look at the motivation, and we have 5 boys and 2 girls, but this particular son, part of his motivation is he felt like he was not personally going to the Betty Ford Clinic, but that the world was.
Yeah.
Right. And part of his motivation around everything that he's learned through the B Corp process is he wants a world to live in. And so I'm just curious. So if you're leading a company and you have young people in your company who think differently than you do, right? Some of what's a burning platform for them has been kind of maybe not so for me, and the second part of the question is how does your organization or you, I mean, I've read some of your writing. I read the Change in the Time of Change piece, and I have questions about that too. But how do you deal with we're fractured in so many ways? So there's climate deniers, and there's people who are afraid for their future or don't know if they want to have children.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and again, very, very sympathetic to that sense that your son shares. No, again, I think this is sort of what we write about in our book, Monster, this notion of the algorithmic rabbit holes that people are going down, spending so much time on social media. The phrase e pluribus unum, out of many one, the motto of America. It feels to me like we're in an era now of e pluribus pluribus, out of many, many, because we're all living in our own reality, and your son's reality is not the reality that a 55-year-old, 60-year-old CEO is living in. And I think, again, this is an existential challenge to societies, but it's an existential challenge in a business context, because getting alignment, in the business language, getting people on the same page, getting people to see the same mission, again, is becoming harder and harder. And the tension between the entrepreneurial spirit that you want in a business, people to be acting, not just to be, waiting to be told what to do, but at the same time having a strategy, having a vision that people believe in, that share, that are committed to, that are energized by. Again, I think this is extremely difficult work, but has never been more important. Again, I think this is in a way the nature of change. I'm sure you know the famous phrase that the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. I mean, this has always been true, and particularly in large organizations, is getting everybody on the same page, getting the people who can see the future, getting the people who are, wedded to a model that's worked for them, and they've ascended the greasy pole through that model, and they don't want to give that up. I mean, again, that is, that is a long-standing challenge, and it becomes harder and harder for large organizations, particularly in this unforgiving, late-stage Western capitalist world that we live in, to do that. But again, that is the challenge. That is the opportunity. We in the MIT report that I mentioned earlier on, we interviewed Ed Bastian from Delta, and the interview happened sort of this time last year, so really in the middle of the pandemic. And talking to him and listening to him, what I think I was struck by, I think my co-authors were struck by, was how much time he was spending talking to his people, talking to the troops. And I think it was beginning to dawn on him and other people as well that actually, obviously, huge downsides for an airline then and still now with reduced travel. But one of the benefits of this kind of Zoom world that we were all catapulted into was that he was able to spend more time talking to people than he had been, in the pre-COVID times. He could literally talk to thousands of people, every day. He didn't have to sort of fly to Sacramento one day to talk to 50 people or 100 people, and then fly to New Orleans to talk to another group. He was talking to people all the day, lots and lots of people all the time. So he was over communicating, and in his mind, that over communication was that in this moment of, again, existential stress and challenge, he needed to be more visible than he was before. He needed to be clearer than he was before. He needed to be more empathetic to his people than he had been before. And I think that, I think that is a great learning for anybody, and I think continues here into 2021 and beyond. The need to over communicate. Again, business writers, management theorists have said this for a long time, but it for the reason you say, Leb, in this disparate world that people are living in now, the need to try and bring people together for that shared mission, that shared sense of what we're trying to do here, again, has never been more important.
Yes.
I'm curious, assuming he was listening as much as he was talking, what did he learn? Did he share any insights for spending all that time talking to his people? What were some of the biggest takeaways for him?
I think at the time there was a great need for empathy. I think people were scared, both of the actual virus, but of the economic damage, the impact it was going to have on their livelihoods. And I think he said, and in fact, we talked to CEOs of a number of big companies. Starbucks was another example where, I mean, going back to our conversation about, quarterly earnings, people were saying, we just got to forget about that. We just got to not even think about that. We've got to think about keeping our people safe, keeping our people in a good place. Again, you can be cynical and skeptical about that, but I think that notion of listening, as you say, Patrick, of wanting to listen, to be seen, to be not just, again, the CEO that has a big mouth and small ears. I think that was very important, and again, I think that will sustain itself, endure, beyond this particular moment. Again, for the reasons that Leb says, is that if that conversation is just one directional rather than bi-directional, and you're trying to win hearts and minds and bring people on a journey in a very, very difficult time, stressful time, I think that's a big part of it, and I think that's probably what he was reflecting in his comments to us.
Yeah, you led with, at the time, empathy was really important, and I think I would argue, even in conversations with CEOs, as well as conversations with their teams, it's just as important today. I almost feel like empathy is an emergent. To me, I feel like it's always been important. The ability to connect with somebody, meet them where they are, and convey, I hear you, I get you, I understand you. But it feels like it's an emerging, or its importance is really emerging. Like
I think that's absolutely right. And I think, again, I relate this back, and maybe this is my own unconscious bias, to technology and the need to get the next generation of digital talent into your organization. Without that, I don't think you've got, a good future on the K-shape. And if that's true, and this talent pool, younger people, that style, I mean, that's an element of that style, I would say, Patrick. I mean, again, it's a generation of kids. You can be cynical, but the snowflake generation, or whatever people call them, everyone wins prizes. They don't like being shouted at, all that kind of stuff. But again, that's the reality of that part of the world. And if you're a leader, you can shout at people all you like, but that talent pool has more options than ever. I mean, we're seeing this in the market ourselves at the moment. That the demand for that talent is such that people have half a dozen offers, and people walk very easily. Not much loyalty. And particularly if you haven't shown much loyalty in the past yourself. So those soft skills, again, we can all be cynical and skeptical about them, and they're very hard to quantify and all the stuff that you guys talk about all the time, I'm sure. But the reality is that that's probably never been more important. In fact, I think in my analysis, looking at change and digitally catalyzed change over the last 20, 25 years, there's been an overemphasis on investments in technology and an underemphasis in investments in talent. People plug in a new gizmo, a new server, a new AWS platform, and they think that that's a big step towards digital transformation. They spend much less time thinking about the cultural aspects, the personality aspects of what this next generation of talent wants, looks like, feels like, talks like. And I think, again, that would be a dial I would turn up if I was a CEO through my HR department, but more broadly than that, to understand the new talent we want, to understand what they want, to understand how to motivate those people and keep those people, frankly.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, that's good.
It really is. It makes me feel, if I'm a CEO, that I might feel pretty vulnerable, because I have to rely on younger people of a different generation, perhaps with values they're new to me, and trust enough that they're leading us in the right direction.
Yeah,
because I'm not a techie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think, again, that Clive Davis model I mentioned earlier on is a good one. I think is obviously worked for him. Is you've got to trust the people around you. You've got to have the right people around you. You've got to understand that the customer, the marketplace isn't necessarily what you want. It's not everybody wants Frank Sinatra nowadays. If you're just building your Frank Sinatra kind of insurance model, or your Frank Sinatra car, that's going to be a problem. And you're right. And I think obviously that is a challenge. to that command and control hierarchical based model that probably a lot of CEOs have grown up through themselves. I was deferential to the CEO myself when I was 30. How come this 30-year-old isn't being deferential to me now? I'm a 60-year-old CEO. The world has kind of changed. Get used to it.
Yes.
And again, that comes back to this adaptability aspect we were talking about earlier on. It's a very, very real issue for that person who is now in charge, but the world has moved on.
Yeah, we had a CEO on in one of our recent episodes who was talking about bringing everybody back to the office after having gone virtual through COVID, and he said, I really had to challenge my own thinking, because my belief is we work better in teams, we work better together. And yet I know if I do that, if I make everybody come back to the office, I'm going to lose people. Yeah. So it's really challenging. He said, I have to be willing to challenge my own beliefs, and be adaptable myself, so that the organization can adapt with it. So,
yeah, no, I think this is a perfect example, and I'm spending a lot of time talking to people about the future of the office at the moment, what that looks like, and how should we think about that. And I think that's exactly right, Patrick, that again, this next generation, the talent that you want, has got more options than ever, it wants more flexibility than ever, wants more purpose than ever, has got used to kind of working in Starbucks over a long period of time with their beats on, on the couch rather than in the cubicle. And if you're going to try and force that genie back into the bottle, force people back into the model that you grew up with and through and succeeded within, I think that's going to be a problem. We still obviously need to come together as people to do what I call heads up work, where we're kind of looking at each other in the whites of the eyes. We're trying to collaborate and be creative. But when we're doing that heads down work, coding or doing our spreadsheet, we can do that anywhere. Why force people to go back into that cubicle that people hated? One of the things I saw for many, many years on my travels, I'd go into a big business, a big office building, and I'd be led through to the conference room where I was going to talk to people or present. And these rows of cubicles empty, because people hated being in those cubicles and had left or were working in Starbucks. That model, the death of the cubicle, was very real before COVID. I think it's sort of on life support now. People want to come together to be together, but they don't want to be in those ugly spaces. So if that CEO is thinking, and you can see this debate raging in the marketplace between the Goldman Sachs model, everybody's got to be back in the office by Labor Day or just after Labor Day. If you can go to a restaurant in Manhattan now, you can come to an office. That's kind of one end of the continuum, and then there's the sort of Barclays Bank other end of the continuum, where they've said, well, we'll probably have 70% less people in offices for the foreseeable future. So this is raging, but this debate is raging at the moment. But I think, again, that 50-year-old CEO who did the commute, who schlepped into Manhattan from Greenwich for 20 years and clawed his way or her way to the top, and thinks everybody's got to do that now.
Yep.
I think that's dinosaur thinking, and is going to backfire on people big time.
Do you know, I have a client right now who, because of COVID, they got out of their lease. They went 100% virtual. So they're now all 100% virtual. The first 2 openings they had on their team, they had more high-level applicants than they'd ever had from other job openings. They got applicants from currently employed people, high-level people in other organizations who said, our company is making us go back into the office. I don't want to do that. And so it came to, they were so surprised by the quality of the applicants that instead of choosing between the top 2 candidates, they hired both of them. They thought, why would we let that go? So
no, I think this is a really significant moment of change in work, and certainly the sort of bourgeois white collar work that we do. I sort of broke away from the regular commute 25 years ago when I came to America. Part of the reason why I wanted to come to America was in England, in London, where I grew up and where I worked in the early part of my career. it was a commute-based model. England, if you know the kind of British economy, London is so central that people commute 2 hours to come into, you know, the city to work. I hated that. I didn't want to do that. And I kind of got an inkling that because America was so much bigger and it was so much more distributed, there wasn't the same complete center of gravity that London is in the UK. And people in America will, you know, routinely say, well, you're in Boston, I'm in Dallas, you know, I'll come to you, you come to me. And I've done that in my own personal career, sort of broke away from a city, arbitraged a city salary into a kind of quieter part of the country, bigger house, and I've worked remotely for 25 years. And and I love it. And people who have continued to commute, I've got a neighbor who commutes into Boston, or was commuting into Boston pre-COVID, you know, an hour and a half on the bus in the morning, an hour and a half. I used to say to him, you're crazy, why are you doing this? And then now in the COVID experience, he stopped doing that and loves it. And I think this was an article, a big article in the FT today about the death of commuting. And I think more and more people, like the example you were sharing, Patrick, are going to come to this conclusion. This is a much better way to work. Sure, we want to be in the office some of the time. Yeah. We don't want to be stuck, you know, off the grid all of the time. I pre-COVID, I think in 2019, I stayed in 43 different hotels around the world during the year. I love traveling. I love being with people. But when I'm doing my heads down work, writing, I don't need to be in a cubicle next to somebody shouting in my ear. It doesn't make any sense for me in the work that I'm sort of doing.
Right.
I have a question, and maybe the context is emotional intelligence. So working in a large transportation organization in New York City, part of the frustration for CEO and leadership was these young people that just walk in my office. Like they have no manners. They just walk in my office to ask me a question or tell me about something. And so it was impacting the culture. Yeah, and this is pre-COVID. And so now, and I read, when I read Change in the Time of Change, there were kind of some Zen-like comments in there. One of them was simply through understanding that what we thought was the best of times was simply the time. And if the worst of times are ahead, they are simply the times. So nothing is fixed and nothing is permanent. You know, I felt like, oh, it's like you've been hanging out with Phil Jackson or something. But how do you do that? I find the emotional intelligence work is a lot harder digitally.
Yes, no, that's true. And I think a lot of people are feeling sort of Zoom fatigue or Zoom lag. You know, we swap jet lag for Zoom lag.
If we're peeking around the corner to the future, and we want to bring these younger talent and all these diverse people, including everything about diversity, together and aligned, and we're primarily remote. I'm just wondering, you know, what you're hearing or, you know, what's being researched about that, because I find it a lot harder to do the emotional intelligence type work digitally.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Lev. No, I mean, again, I think the way I sort of frame it is that the function of the office, if you think about what the office is really for, it's really for three things, I believe. It's the office as a showroom. You know, it's where you bring prospects in, clients in, influencers in to kind of show that you're a player. It's an R&D facility. It's where you cook the secret sauce of what it is you do. So that's, you know, you need people to come together to do that. And then the third function of the office is it's a social space. It's really a party space. it's where you build the network, where you build the relationships, you do the soft things, the EQ kind of thing. So I think if you buy that logic and you think about it, again, rather than forcing people to come back into the cubicles, bring them back when they want to be social, when they want to do the creative work, that R&D work, and make it a more social kind of environment. I'm sure many of your listeners and you guys yourselves have kind of experienced that end of year social / business review kind of meeting. Cognizant have traditionally had this as sort of end of year for the top 2,000 people in the company down in Florida, 4 or 5 days in a nice hotel. And if you think about that, there's a business element to that. We're reviewing the business, we're planning the business, but the real role of that, it's a party, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's the evenings where the real action happens, where you make a friendship, you create a network, you sort of come up with an idea after a couple of libations, and I think again that perhaps in this future of kind of office discussion, that what we might see is that again in a kind of hybrid model where maybe people are going in once or twice a week, and then working at home quite routinely, where there's a sort of hoteling platform, so you book a space so you can reduce the overall net office need that you have. What I think you might see is that end of year social actually becomes maybe end of month social. And being in the office for that Friday or that Thursday at the end of the month, everybody comes in that day, and we do a business review, we do planning, but we keep the culture, we keep the EQ alive, because you say quite rightly, doing it online, it's not a very good substitute. We're all feeling that ourselves at the moment. More and more people are sort of turning the camera off when they're on these platforms because it's draining. Having to look at people and have people look at you in a way that doesn't really happen in the office, and when we're face to face. So, no, I think you're right. One other comment about that, Lev. I think it's a fascinating discussion, and again, in a leadership context, it's a fascinating discussion. This sort of relationship between humans and automation. I think, and we've written, our book, What to Do When Machines Do Everything, was really all about this, that everything that can be automated is going to be automated. That's just a sort of underlying assumption we have got. And so the checkout line, that checkout clerk, that's going to be automated away. All sorts of human work is going to be automated away. And if you think of that, I think the real opportunity for humans is to differentiate themselves from machines. And how do you do that? It's that human touch. It's that EQ that we want as humans. And an example I use of that, and I won't name names because I'll be sued if I put names to this. But if you go into a typical Main Street pharmacy, one of the big box pharmacies, you go into that big space, there's hardly anybody working there now. And the people that are working there seem very dejected, very down. It's hard to get anybody kind of smile at you, say, hi, how are you? Go into, I suppose I'm speaking positively about them, so I can mention them. Go into an Apple store, and there are so many people working there, you can't shake, you sort of can't get away from them somehow.
You have to talk to somebody. Yes.
Yeah, and it's and they're saying, hi, how you doing, and how can I help you, and what are you up to, what are you doing? And I think the underlying story there is that Apple have automated all the automatable elements of that away, and they're hiring good people, nice people who have that EQ, who can look you in the eye, who can smile, who can be helpful, who can be attractive and engaging with you. And I think that's the real opportunity for more and more people. I think we need a kind of renaissance of the Swiss finishing school. We need to learn those manners again. That young person coming into the CEO's office needs to have the manners to handle that kind of relationship. Certainly, maybe I'm sounding an old fuddy-duddy myself now here, but I think there's been a real degradation of that, a real sort of weakening of those qualities, certainly in my lifetime. I think there's an opportunity to re-energize that, have a renaissance, because we don't need somebody to be on the checkout counter just going beep, 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 as the soup goes through, the cereal goes through. We want people to be interested and engaging? Have you thought of this to be the human version of the Amazon algorithm that always be suggesting algorithm? You like this? Well, what about that? That's the opportunity, and injecting a sort of EQ back into that. I think, to your point, Lev, I think that's the real opportunity, the challenge. I think companies that do that, and I think countries that do that, and individuals that do that, I think that's a big part of the way forward.
Yeah, imagine taking the checkout person off the line and putting them at the front door to greet you and take you around the store and help you find things. And,
if there's some senior walks in, can you help that senior navigate that senior around the building? You don't need them to do the automatable bits, because because the real robots are showing up. We don't need people to impersonate robots. We've got real robots to do that, but we want people to have a human experience. Exactly, Patrick. That's a great example.
Yeah. Ben, I feel like we could go forever. And at the same time, it's probably time to start steering us towards the finish line. Thank you. All kinds of great ideas. I can understand why you've been named one of the, some of the top thought leaders, thinkers. I think I told Leb and Patsy when I first mentioned to them that we were bringing you on, and I saw that you had been named one of the top 30 thinkers. I told them I don't even think I'm one of the top 30 thinkers in my own house. So to have you on has really been an honor. It's thank you.
It's very kind. I appreciate it.
It is time. We end every episode. Our listeners know this. We end every episode with something we call "Let's Get Practical," because we believe if nothing changes, nothing changes. So I tried to furiously take some notes. I'm also going to give each of you an opportunity to weigh in. What were some of the key takeaways today that if I'm a CEO, what can I begin to implement in my organization? What should I be thinking about implementing in my organization sooner than later to help move us forward? Ben, I'll actually throw it to you first, and that way I can try to fill in things I took that maybe you that you haven't covered already.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this quite a bit, and I'd sort of just re-emphasize it, this notion of perhaps broadening the informal and probably the formal groups of advice around you as a CEO, as a senior leader, your own advisory councils, your own advisory boards, your own reverse mentoring groups that perhaps help you tap into what the next generation are thinking about. That Clive Davis model of surrounding yourself with people who can give you visibility into the blind spots that you've got, being open about that, being open and saying, I don't really feel comfortable, I know exactly what's going on in that world. I think trying to do that, as I say, formally, informally, I think that would be a smart thing to do. If I was sitting in that kind of lonely spot, that is what I would be trying to do. Make sure that I was being as well advised as I possibly could from as many sources as kind of appropriate.
Excellent. Lever Patsy, what do you have?
I've got the importance of creating a compelling narrative.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Several things jumped out at me. One was the notion of being empathetic, and how important it is right now, when that may not have been the cultural norm, right? Or what was expected of a CEO or a leader. I love the notion of create social space, and there's going to be a lot of space available. So
there is.
We can throw a big party. Yeah.
How's that going to happen? And I thought that was really valuable. Getting people aligned is kind of an old notion, but it's also a new challenge and a new opportunity. As we peek around the corner at the future. And again, I've heard it before, but I haven't heard it in the way that you framed it around, the importance of the narrative, kind of balancing listening and speaking, and over communicating, because we're in this period of just constant change. So those are a few, Patrick, of what I took note of. And I had not really thought of stakeholder capitalism. So I'm excited to explore that and just recognize there's something about the way we have been operating that has led us to this point, right? And looking in another direction, critically important.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So here's what I will add. I had several that you did, and I had a few others. So one, Ben, you made the point about making sure that you've got a strategy to get your people comfortable with technology, and perhaps even begin to think of yourself as a technology company if you haven't before.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Because that's going to be important. You shared the example of the 50-year-old employee developing an app for a 30-year-old customer. And so just be aware of, be cognizant of making sure that you're creating products and services for your customers and not for yourself, that you are really thinking about who is the user. And when you answer that question, then maybe even be ready to ask the question, am I the right person to develop this, or do I need help? Do I need to surround myself with advisors to make sure that I'm creating a product or a service that meets my customer's need? And then this is one I just thought was really strong. Ben, I think you even said, get the next generation of digital talent into your company. I feel like that's an imperative. If I'm a CEO and I want us to make it through this, I want us to be on the other side of this paring down of companies that have there are a lot of burning platforms right now. Whatever it takes to get the next generation of digital talent into your company, get over your disdain for that generation, right? The labels that we put, the snowflakes and the trophy winner, get over that and embrace that you won't survive without them. I just thought that was a really strong point that you made. And then the last one I had, I don't know, maybe it's not even as strong as that one, but just look at your investment in your talent and how does it compare to the investments you've made in technology over the years? And is there a rebalancing that needs to happen? Are we investing in as much in our talent as we have in our technology? Because what I heard you say is they're both equally important.
Yeah.
So good. Anything else that I missed?
No, you guys were taking good notes. I'm honored.
Well, I even with that, Ben, I think I probably missed half of just because you were spewing great thoughts at such a great pace. So I just want to say thank you, Ben. Where can people? Let me say this. Leb even mentioned a couple articles. You've got books. Your work's been featured in Harvard Business Review and the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times, BBC, NPR, PBS, a host of other places. Where can people find out? Where can they see more of your content? Where can they find out about the cool stuff that you and Cognizant are doing?
Yeah, no, thank you, Patrick. Well, cognizant.com, you can see everything that we produce there. I'm at Benjamin Pring on Twitter. I'm pretty visible online. So yeah, lots of stuff, no paywalls. So check it all out. And hope people will find it interesting.
Excellent. Ben, thank you for being our guest today on The Frustrated CEO. And obviously, thank you, Patsy and Lab. You guys are fantastic co-hosts. Thank you for your insights as always. And thank you, listener, for sharing your time with us today. Don't forget to head over to thefrustratedceo.com to download today's Let's Get Practical, as well as every other Let's Get Practical from our previous episodes. And then please be sure to subscribe so that you are aware of and alerted to future shows. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again next time.